The waiter wasn't looking at my sister-in-law. He wasn't looking at the man who had organized the dinner. He walked straight toward me and quietly placed the bill in front of my plate. The entire table fell silent. Then someone smiled and said, "Go on, we all know you'll take care of it." That's when I realized this dinner had never been about celebrating. It had been planned around one expectation: me. My name is Keanu, a 34-year-old logistics manager who believes family should make life lighter, not heavier. My wife, Ayanda, often says I have a bad habit of helping people before they even ask. Maybe she's right. Over the years, I'd paid school fees for cousins, helped relatives through medical emergencies, repaired cars, and quietly loaned money that rarely came back. I never kept score because I thought kindness would eventually return. Instead, it taught everyone to expect more. My older brother married Zuri, a woman who loved expensive experiences and the attention that came with them. Family gatherings slowly became competitions: designer clothes, luxury vacations, extravagant birthdays. I stayed out of it until one anniversary dinner changed everything. When my brother called to invite me to Zuri's birthday dinner, he sounded happier than I had heard him in months. He told me the whole family would be there and said he wanted everyone together to celebrate her special day. The restaurant he chose was the newest and most expensive place in the city. I even joked that it sounded way too fancy for our family, but he laughed and said, "Don't worry about the money. Tonight is about making memories, not counting dollars." Those words made me feel relaxed, so I didn't think twice about accepting the invitation. When Ayanda and I arrived, everything looked beautiful. The lights were soft, the tables were decorated with fresh flowers, and the staff welcomed everyone with big smiles. Zuri was already taking pictures with different family members. Before anyone even looked at the menu, people were posing for photos, recording short videos, and posting everything on social media. Everyone looked happy. Children were running around laughing, grandparents were smiling, and music played quietly in the background. It felt like the perfect family celebration. But after we sat down, I noticed something that slowly made me uncomfortable. Every time the waiter came to the table and suggested the most expensive steak, seafood platter, or rare bottle of wine, nobody answered right away. Instead, several people looked at me first. Then they smiled and ordered the premium option without asking how much it cost. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I told myself they were only looking around the table while deciding what to eat. As the evening continued, it happened again and again. Someone ordered extra seafood for the table. Another person added expensive drinks. Then came more side dishes, desserts, and special items that were not even on the regular menu. Every single time, I caught someone glancing at me before they placed the order. It was almost as if they were silently checking whether I was still sitting there. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Something about the dinner no longer felt natural. Everyone seemed unusually relaxed about spending so much money. I tried to ignore the feeling and enjoy the evening, telling myself I was simply overthinking things. Looking back now, that was my biggest mistake. I should have trusted my instincts from the very beginning. By the time dinner was coming to an end, everyone looked completely satisfied. The table was covered with empty plates, glasses, and dessert spoons. Then the lights inside the restaurant became slightly dim. A large birthday dessert was brought to the table with small fireworks sparkling on top. Everyone clapped, sang for Zuri, and took even more pictures. She smiled proudly while people recorded videos for social media. It looked like the perfect ending to a wonderful family celebration. A few minutes later, the waiter walked back toward our table. He was holding a black leather folder in his hand. I thought he was coming to ask how we wanted to split the bill or whether someone else had already arranged the payment. Instead, without saying a single word, he stopped beside me and gently placed the folder right in front of my plate. For a moment, I simply stared at it. I looked around the table, expecting someone to laugh and say there had been a mistake. Nobody said anything. Everyone stayed quiet. I slowly opened the folder. The total was $9,200. I honestly thought I had read it wrong. I looked at the number again, hoping another family member would finally speak up. Before I could even ask why the bill was in front of me, Zuri smiled as if everything was completely normal. "You've always been the generous one," she said. Several relatives nodded their heads with small smiles. A few even looked at me with the kind of expression that said, "Go ahead. We know you'll pay." That was the moment my heart sank. Nobody asked if I was willing to pay. Nobody asked if I had planned for this. Nobody even looked surprised that the bill had been handed to me. It was clear they had all expected this to happen. The amount of money shocked me, but what hurt even more was realizing that my kindness had stopped being appreciated. In their minds, it had become my responsibility. I looked at the bill one last time before slowly closing the leather folder. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. I looked around the table at every face. My brother avoided looking into my eyes. Zuri was still smiling as if she already knew what I was going to do. The rest of the family sat quietly, waiting for me to reach for my wallet. It felt like everyone had already decided the ending of the evening without asking me a single question. I took a slow breath and spoke one simple word. No. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't insult anyone. It was just one calm, quiet word. The change around the table was immediate. The laughter disappeared. The smiles faded. The same people who had been joking with me all evening suddenly looked at me like I had done something terrible. What do you mean, no? One cousin asked. Another relative shook his head and said, after everything your brother has done for you, this is how you repay him? Someone sitting farther down the table whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, he's embarrassing the whole family. Then another voice said, come on, Keanu. You have the best job here. You can easily afford it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not one person asked whether I had agreed to pay before the dinner. Not one person asked if the bill should be shared. They only cared that I wasn't doing what they expected. It stopped being about the restaurant bill. It stopped being about money. Suddenly, I was being judged as a son, a brother, and a family member. Years of helping relatives through difficult times were forgotten in a few seconds. The school fees I had paid, the emergency loans, the hospital bills, the repairs, and every favor I had quietly done for family meant nothing anymore. All because I had finally said one word they had never expected to hear. At that moment, I realized something painful. Some people don't remember everything you have done for them. They only remember the first time you refused to do more. I left the restaurant with Ayanda without saying another word. The drive home felt longer than usual. Neither of us spoke much because we were both trying to understand what had just happened. I kept replaying the dinner in my mind. I wondered if I could have handled it differently, but deep inside I knew I had done nothing wrong. I had simply refused to pay a bill that nobody had discussed with me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. As soon as I picked up my phone, I saw dozens of missed calls and unread messages. My screen was completely full. At first, I thought something serious had happened in the family overnight. Then I started reading. One message said, I can't believe you treated your own brother like that. Another read, you should be ashamed of yourself. A cousin I had not spoken to in almost 4 years called me selfish. An uncle who knew nothing about the dinner sent a long message saying that family should always come before money. I couldn't believe it. Not one person asked me what had really happened. They had already decided I was guilty. The family group chat was even worse. People were writing long messages about respect, generosity, and family values. Some relatives who were not even at the restaurant were sharing their opinions as if they had watched everything happen with their own eyes. Then Ayanda showed me something that made my heart sink even more. On social media, several family members had posted pictures from the dinner with strange captions about being disappointed by someone who had ruined a beautiful celebration. Nobody mentioned my name, but everyone in the family knew exactly who they were talking about. Friends and relatives began leaving comments, praising my brother and feeling sorry for him. The real story had completely disappeared. A new story had replaced it. In that version, I was the rich relative who had refused to help his own family over one restaurant bill. That morning taught me a painful lesson I had never truly understood before. A lie does not need to be true to spread. It only needs enough people willing to repeat it. And once that happens, the truth has to fight twice as hard just to be heard. 3 days passed after the dinner, but the messages from relatives still had not stopped. Some people ignored me completely, while others kept telling me to apologize to my brother and pay the bill before things became even worse. I decided not to answer anyone. There was no point arguing with people who had already made up their minds. That afternoon, while I was at work, my phone rang. I did not recognize the number, so I almost ignored it. For some reason, I answered. The person on the other end politely introduced herself as someone from the restaurant's guest relations office. My first thought was that they were calling to collect the unpaid bill. Instead, she said, "Mr. Keanu, I'm not calling to ask you for payment. I just need to clear up something about the reservation." Her words immediately caught my attention. She explained that after the dinner, there had been confusion among the staff because different guests had given different versions of what happened. The restaurant simply wanted to confirm a few details for their records. As she spoke, I learned things that completely surprised me. She told me the reservation had been made almost 3 weeks before the dinner. It was not a last-minute booking like my brother had claimed. The person who made the reservation had asked for a private table, the most experienced waiter, and several special birthday services, including premium desserts and celebration fireworks. Then she paused before saying something I will never forget. The reservation notes also included payment instructions. I felt my heart beat faster. She explained that the notes said the final bill would be presented to me at the end of the evening. My full name had been written clearly in the reservation details. There were also instructions not to ask whether the bill should be divided, because the host had already explained that I would be taking care of everything. I sat there in complete silence. I had never spoken to anyone at the restaurant before that night. I had never agreed to pay. I had never even known those instructions existed. When the call ended, I stared at my phone for several minutes. Everything finally made sense. The expensive food, the confident smiles, the way nobody looked surprised when the bill was placed in front of me. It had all been planned long before I walked through the restaurant doors. That bill had never found me by mistake. Someone had carefully made sure it reached exactly the person they expected would never say no. After that phone call, I wanted to call my brother immediately and demand an explanation. I wanted to ask Zuri why she had planned everything without telling me. But Ayanda gently stopped me. She told me that anger would only create more arguments. She said it was better to learn the whole truth before speaking to anyone. So I stayed quiet. Over the next few days, I spoke to a few family members one at a time. I did not accuse anyone. I simply asked them what they remembered about that night. One of my younger cousins looked uncomfortable before finally telling me the truth. He admitted that the dinner had felt strange from the beginning. He said everyone was ordering the most expensive meals without any concern because they believed I was paying. He thought I already knew about the plan, so he never questioned it. Later, I met one of the waiters from the restaurant by chance. When I politely asked about the evening, he remembered our table immediately. He told me the staff had received clear instructions before any guest arrived. They had been told exactly where everyone would sit and exactly who should receive the final bill. To him, it had seemed like a normal request from the person who made the reservation. The conversation that hurt me the most was with my elderly aunt. She held my hand and looked at me with sad eyes. "I truly believed you had offered to pay," she quietly said. Everyone spoke as if it had already been decided. "I never imagined they expected you to find out at the end." Her words stayed with me. Little by little, everything became clear. Nobody had forced my family to believe I would pay. They believed it because I had spent years helping without ever saying no. Every loan, every favor, every problem I solved had slowly created an expectation. My kindness had become something people counted on instead of appreciated. The restaurant bill was never just about one expensive dinner. It was the result of years of people believing my generosity would always be there, no matter how much they asked for. A few evenings later, I was sitting alone on the back porch of our house, staring into the distance. I was not thinking about the money anymore. The $9,200 bill had stopped being the biggest problem. What stayed in my mind was the way everyone had looked at me that night, as if I had failed them by refusing something I had never agreed to do. Ayanda quietly came outside and sat beside me. She did not ask me what I was thinking. She did not try to give me advice. She simply sat there with me, letting the silence do its work. Sometimes she understood me better without saying anything at all. After several minutes, she gently placed her hand over mine. Then she asked one simple question. "If your brother and Zuri came here tomorrow and apologized for everything, would anything really change?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that one apology could fix everything. But deep inside, I knew it couldn't. The problem had never been just one dinner or one restaurant bill. The real pain came from something much deeper. For years, I had happily helped my family whenever they needed me. I paid school fees without asking for repayment. I helped with hospital bills, repaired broken cars, and lent money even when I knew I might never see it again. I did those things because I loved my family. I never expected praise or rewards. But somewhere along the way, something changed. My kindness stopped being seen as a gift. It became a duty. People no longer appreciated what I chose to do. They expected it. When I finally said no for the first time, they acted as if I had broken a promise that I had never made. That truth hurt far more than the insults, the angry messages, or the gossip. Ayanda gently held my hand. "You are not responsible for expectations you never agreed to," she said softly. Her words stayed with me. For the first time, I understood that kindness without boundaries can slowly become a burden. People stop seeing it as a gift and begin seeing it as something they are owed. That evening changed the way I looked at every relationship in my life. I realized that real love is never measured by how much you give. It is measured by whether people still respect you when, for once, you cannot or choose not to give at all. About 2 weeks after the dinner, the oldest members of our family asked everyone to come together for a family meeting. They said too much anger had built up, and it was time for everyone to talk face to face. Almost every relative came. Some looked nervous, while others looked ready for another argument. As I walked into the room with Ayanda, I could feel people watching me. I knew many of them still believed I had ruined the birthday dinner. At first, the conversation was exactly what I expected. A few relatives brought up the restaurant bill again. They said the evening had ended badly because I refused to pay. My brother stayed quiet, and Zuri folded her arms without saying much. Then my oldest uncle slowly stood up. He looked around the room before speaking. "We're asking the wrong question," he said. "This is no longer about one restaurant bill." The room became quiet. He asked everyone to think about the last 10 years instead of one dinner. One by one, people began remembering different moments. An aunt thanked me for helping with hospital costs when her husband was sick. A cousin admitted I had quietly paid part of his college fees when he could not afford them. Another relative remembered how I had repaired his car without asking for anything in return. As more people spoke, the mood in the room slowly changed. Then one of my older cousins lowered his head and said something honest. "I think we stopped appreciating Keanu's kindness a long time ago," he admitted. "We just started expecting it." No one argued with him. For the first time since the birthday dinner, people were not talking about money. They were talking about respect. They were talking about gratitude. They were talking about how easily kindness can become something people feel entitled to. That family meeting was not really about a restaurant bill anymore. It became a moment when everyone had to face an uncomfortable truth. Somewhere along the way, our family had slowly confused love with convenience. Instead of being thankful when someone helped, we had begun believing that help would always be there. And that was the real problem we needed to fix. When the family meeting finally ended, everyone slowly walked toward the door. Some relatives came over to shake my hand. A few quietly apologized for judging me without knowing the full story. Others avoided looking at me at all. I realized that not everyone would admit they had been wrong, and I accepted that. I no longer felt the need to convince anyone. I had spent too much time trying to protect relationships that only worked when I kept giving. As Ayanda and I drove home, I made an important decision. I was not going to argue with anyone. I was not going to get revenge. I was not going to post angry messages on social media or tell my side of the story to every relative. I simply decided that from that day forward, I would stop saying yes just because I felt guilty. It sounded like a small change, but it completely changed my life. A few weeks later, a cousin called asking for money to cover another expense. For the first time, I politely said, "I'm sorry, I can't help this time." He ended the call quickly. After that, I barely heard from him again. Another relative asked me to pay for expensive repairs. Again, I kindly refused. The conversations became shorter. The phone calls became less frequent. Some people who had contacted me almost every month suddenly disappeared from my life. At first, that hurt. Then I began to understand something. The people who only wanted my help were never truly interested in me. But something else also happened. My elderly aunt still called every weekend just to ask how Ayanda and I were doing. One cousin invited us for dinner and insisted that everyone pay for their own meal. Even my younger relatives started visiting simply to spend time together, without asking for anything. Those relationships felt different. They felt lighter. They felt honest. For the first time in years, I no longer wondered whether someone was calling because they cared about me or because they needed something from me. That simple boundary changed everything. I learned that saying no does not destroy real family. It only removes the relationships that were built on expectations instead of love. The people who truly cared stayed. The rest quietly walked away on their own. Months passed, and life slowly became peaceful again. The constant phone calls stopped. The family group chats became quieter. People had learned that I was no longer the person who would automatically solve every financial problem. At first, that change felt strange. Then it started to feel like freedom. One afternoon, another family celebration was planned. This time, it was my cousin's wedding anniversary. When Ayanda and I received the invitation, she looked at me and smiled. "Are you nervous?" she asked. I laughed for the first time in a long while. "Not anymore," I replied. When we arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere felt completely different from that birthday dinner months earlier. People greeted each other warmly, children laughed together, and everyone enjoyed the evening without showing off or trying to impress anyone. I noticed something else almost immediately. There were no secret glances toward me. No one watched what I ordered. No one acted as if I was responsible for the evening. When dinner was over, the waiters quietly walked from table to table. Each family paid for their own meals before dessert was even served. Some couples paid together, others split the cost, and everyone thanked the staff with a smile. There was no confusion, no uncomfortable silence, and no waiting to see who would rescue the evening. For the first time in years, I simply enjoyed being with my family. As I looked around the room, I saw people talking honestly, laughing naturally, and enjoying one another without hidden expectations. The evening felt lighter because nobody was carrying a burden that belonged to someone else. I suddenly realized that saying no to that $9,200 restaurant bill had cost me something for a little while. I lost my reputation in the eyes of people who never knew the full truth. I was judged, criticized, and misunderstood. But in return, I gained something far more valuable. I gained peace. I gained self-respect. I gained relationships built on honesty instead of obligation. Most importantly, I gained the freedom to be appreciated for my character, my kindness, and my presence, not for my wallet. That expensive dinner turned out to be the greatest lesson of my life. It didn't make me lose my family. It helped me discover which people were truly family all along. Sometimes the hardest word you'll ever say is no. Not because it's wrong, but because it exposes people who only loved hearing you say yes. The bill wasn't the most expensive part of that night. The real price was discovering which relationships were built on appreciation and which were built on expectation. If you were handed a $9,200 bill that everyone expected you to pay, would you have said no or paid it to keep the peace? Tell me honestly in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable family stories.